Hi friends and fellow book nerds, welcome back to the channel. I just wanted to say first off, thank you so much for all the love on my Kindle vlog that I posted recently. It was really fun to make. Just as a little currently reading check, I did actually start Holly Black's The Prisoner's Throne, which is the sequel to The Stolen Heir. I just wanted to give a little update. Please leave me a comment below, let me know what you're reading. Today we're talking about my ultimate book bucket list. Books to read before I die. Which, you know, hopefully will be many, many years from now. But if I go out drinking Diet Dr. Pepper and aspartame, and that's what takes me, then, you know, I will die doing something I love. Let's get into it. I kind of, if you guys have noticed, am a mood reader. I tend to come up with like overarching lists and TBRs for like themes in my life for the season. I actually got this idea for a bucket list video in kind of a roundabout way. I was watching one of my booktube friends on here, Sully's most recent reading wrap up, and she included in there that she keeps a book bucket list of things that she wants to do that are from books. So things like in Emily Henry's Book Lovers, they visit a town where one of their favorite books is set in. And while this video is not that, the inspiration is there. And that got me thinking of what my actual bucket list books to read are. My ultimate quest log of books to read, if you will. So not exactly the same, but I did want to give her a shout out. A fun part of this video is also that I own a lot of these books because that is one of the criteria for me when I buy books. Every single one of these, I think, is thrifted. But if I see a book at a thrift store and it's one of these bucket list items where it's like, I just want to have that on my shelf as a collector, as a reader, as something that I would like to get to eventually. I really prefer used books. So most of these I actually own physically and they have their trophy spot on my shelf just waiting to be read. So whether they're just very personal to me or they are like one of the all-time great, highly acclaimed books that are on those like 100 books you need to read before you die lists. I have compiled my personal bucket list TBR. These are actually split into 3 categories. So let's get into that first. The first category is kind of more like pop culture, iconic kind of epic series of things that I just personally haven't got to yet. Things that are either from like my generation or things that I think I would have really enjoyed in my youth, but I wasn't really reading then, things like that. The next is kind of more like spiritual, life-changing type of books. The books that when I see people talk about them, they say that that book changed their life. It changed the way they thought. It was one of the best books they've ever read, things like that. And then that kind of leads into the last category, which is just straight up classics, which again are a lot of books that people say are must-reads in your lifetime if you enjoy literature and books at all, ones that are often on like best books of all time lists. So the more traditional classics, whereas that first category is kind of more like modern classics in my opinion. So let's start with that. So first up is Game of Thrones. Technically the series is Song of Ice and Fire. I ranted about House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones in my most recent vlog. And it's just been on my mind recently. I feel like I just really want to start another big fantasy series. There's a few in my brain that I have also done a video on that I really want to get to, but this is just one that's like an ultimate bucket list for me that I think is like kind of up there with Lord of the Rings level of hype and quality and the way that people talk about it. Lord of the Rings is my favorite book series of all time. So this just seems like the natural progression for me to also have read this. So I love high fantasy. This is obviously just something that I really love and want to get to. Speaking of Lord of the Rings, the next book on my list is, I'm gonna have to Google this.
Silmarillion.
The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. As I mentioned, Lord of the Rings is my all-time favorite and I have never read this. For, I think, a valid reason. This one's kind of in its own category, but something that I consider to be a must-read for any Tolkien Lord of the Rings fan. So this is definitely on the list. I have read the full Lord of the Rings series through a few times, seen the movies countless, unfathomable amount of times. So I feel like I'm ready for this, but the reason why this is kind of tough and something that I think not a lot of people end up getting to unless they're like a hardcore Lord of the Rings fan is the fact that this is basically just a collection of like myths and stories and world building of Middle Earth. And this also wasn't technically finished by J.R.R. Tolkien himself. It was completed after he died by his son. So it's actually edited by Christopher Tolkien. This is just one where I just feel like to call myself a true Lord of the Rings fan, I need to read this. I promise this isn't just a plug for my most recent reading vlog, but I also talked about this book in my most recent reading vlog, and that is none other than Twilight. I have never read Twilight. When this came out, 2005, 2007, I didn't write this in my notes, Twilight, 2005. So I was about 14-ish, like just going into high school when Twilight came out. And I was reading a little bit here and there, like I was reading every Harry Potter book when it came out. I read the Hunger Games when they came out a few years after that, but unless it was required reading in school, which I did do and enjoy, to be honest, I was one of those overachiever kids and I was reading Of Mice and Men like for real in high school. I wasn't really picking up books for pleasure most of the time, and I was just too cool for this. Unknowingly that I would be 33 now, thinking that Twilight is like one of the coolest things ever and I just want to read it. I absolutely love the movies. I think they're just such a cult classic. This is a modern classic in my opinion, and I have to read the books. I have to do it. I'm going to be doing it this fall. I'm really excited. I'm going to be doing some like just fall spooky vampire themed reading vlogs for this one, and I'm ready for it. It's just something that I feel like as a millennial, I have to read. This next one is pretty self-explanatory. This is considered to be one of the best sci-fi series of all time. That is Dune. I do really enjoy sci-fi. I watch more sci-fi movies, I would say, than read sci-fi books. But when I do pick up a sci-fi, I love it. And so I have tried to start this a few times and it hasn't happened. You know, this one is quite dense and hard to get through. Obviously, it is great. It's been made into apparently really good movies. I actually haven't seen the adaptations for this yet. But this is just something that, again, as an enjoyer of sci-fi, I have to get to it. This is the last one in this kind of like just personal to me category. Is one that is quite highly acclaimed as a historical fiction, and that is Atonement. The reason that this is on this list is because this is an example of one where I was absolutely obsessed with this movie when it came out. It came out in 2007. And I'm just someone who has always, even as a child, just really enjoyed like really heavy and emotional media. It's just something that I always really appreciated and was drawn to. And my family was kind of like, you want to watch Atonement again? Really? Atonement. Okay, like it's a gorgeous movie. Star-studded cast, James McAvoy, Keira Knightley, Saoirse Ronan. Again, is that how you pronounce it? Let's go back to my Google pronunciation, shall we? Saoirse? I'm pretty sure it's Saoirse. Saoirse Ronan, as a child. This is a heartbreaking story, like really heavy on the trigger warnings. I just really love this movie, and I didn't know that it was a book until later in life. This is another one where I just saw it at a Goodwill, and I was like, okay, I need that book. So this is like a wartime type of historical fiction based on a lot of like family and love type of relationships. I don't know about you all, but when I watched this movie in 2007 and saw Keira Knightley's emerald backless ball gown, it altered my brain chemistry forever. And I spent 2 years of high school searching for a prom dress that was a replica of that dress. It never happened, but I did wear like a long silky like backless dress to my senior prom because of this movie. So this is just one where it's a really powerful movie. It's one where I really want to just read the book, and it's very just important to me and like my journey as a human. So I really want to get to this one eventually. It's like 199 degrees. Sorry, had to do a quick battery change there. Okay. We're back. Actually, I lied. I have one more for this that I actually added the last minute when I saw it on my shelf. And this is another one where I didn't read it in the time it came out for my generation when it was very popular. And again, I have seen the movies and haven't read the books. This is a compilation of all of the Chronicles of Narnia books. I absolutely love this edition. Again, just found it at a Goodwill and I'm obsessed with it. So I just want to read Chronicles of Narnia, Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. I know that this is like a middle grade, younger audience. But I'm personally of the mind where I enjoy reading things that are kind of meant for all ages. I think even as someone who might be in your 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s, there is always something that you can still get from a book that's made for maybe a different generation, because at one point we were that generation, right? So I just really want to read this. I think it'll be so magical. I also saw a YouTuber who I really enjoy watching, Chloe Bunny, recently read the Chronicles of Narnia and vlog about it. It was just a very magical experience and reminded me that this was on my shelf and I need to get to it. Okay, so now we're into the second category of kind of like just really life-changing, maybe kind of spiritual, really impactful books that I have often seen people reference, and ones that I have on my shelf because I have heard of them and they sounded like something that I need in my life. So one of the only ones on this that I don't actually have on my shelf that's on this list that I believe my sister owns, so I'll have to borrow it from her, is Into the Wild, which again, common theme, has been made into a movie and I haven't read the book. I guess that's kind of a common theme through this as well. A lot of these are movies and shows I have seen where I want to read the original source material, right? So Into the Wild, if you're not aware, is a story of a young man who comes from like a well-off family, and after he graduates college and kind of travels around like the Western US, he decides that he doesn't want to be a part of society. He doesn't want to get a traditional job. He actually commits, like when people say they want to sell everything and just like live off the land and go live in the middle of nowhere and talk to no one, he actually did that. He donated all of his money, cut off communication with his family, and literally just walked out into the woods one day. I am from California and have visited a lot of the Western states. It is something that holds a very special place in my heart. I have been to a lot of places in the world, and I do have to admit the national forests, from California up to Alaska, just that entire landscape is truly unlike anything else in the world. So I just feel like this one's really gonna hit home for me. This one's also kind of a controversial one, and I think it's interesting because there's kind of like two schools of thought when it comes to this book, and it's kind of like a question of morality, right? Where this man, is he brave and ambitious, and is it something to admire that he recognized what he wanted out of life and then it wasn't this material, superficial, traditional trajectory of life and working in the system, just making money to survive and then die, you know? Or was it incredibly privileged and selfish of him to cause this real harm and distress for his family who loved him very much, who just never saw him again, and he caused real heartbreak and pain for those people, right? It's kind of an interesting dichotomy there that I really just want to experience for myself and kind of figure out how I feel about that. I kind of already know how I feel about that. I won't get too much into it, but that one's definitely on the bucket list. Next on this list is 100 Years of Solitude. This is, I believe, a Spanish translation. This is very, very widely acclaimed as like one of the must-read pieces of literature of our lifetime. It's often considered to be a masterpiece. 100 Years of Solitude is the first piece of literature since the book of Genesis that should be required reading for the entire human race. I mean, that's a pretty tall order. That's something that makes me feel like I really need to have read this in my life. Magical realism is one of my favorite aspects of reading and literature, and many people say that this is just like one of the most influential and best books they've ever read. This is basically like a multi-generational story of this family where the patriarch of the family created this fictional utopia place in his mind, and all of the story, I believe, kind of like takes place there through the various generations. So my understanding is, obviously, when you think about something like that, touches on a lot of topics of just of overall of humanity, family, inevitability of time and death and pain and just being a human. That's what I'm getting from this anyway. It just seems like something that I would really personally enjoy. So I'm highly, highly anticipating this. This is also just a really gorgeous cover of this one. Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Their other work Love in the Time of Cholera, I want to say. Yes, is also very highly acclaimed and considered one of the best books of all time. I think both of them were really praised for like their really beautiful prose. Very much up my alley, one that I really want to get to. Another one that seems like kind of a, I don't think this one actually is magical realism, but kind of more of a speculative fiction and not necessarily being like a linear storyline type of structure. That is Cloud Atlas. I don't know what this book is about, and I honestly don't even still know how to describe it after reading about it, and that just makes me want to read it even more. I love weird, obscure shit like that just kind of makes you just think in such a different way and really transports you to somewhere else because it's so not rooted like in our reality, but then at the same time literally directly mirrors and reflects so many parts of reality. Like stuff like that just really blows my mind that people can create works of art like that. So this is what I believe is a mix of speculative fiction, historical fiction, kind of sci-fi. And it's basically the way that I understand it, and it sounds so freaking interesting. It's 6 different stories, and then each story is told in a different format and time period and different narrator. So like, but then all the stories are nestled together in the way that you would be like, for example, reading a story that's in the form of like letters from one person to another. And then the person who's reading those stories or observing that story becomes the main character in the next story. And then you end on like a cliffhanger or like a pivotal moment, and then you jump into this next POV, a completely different type of narrative structure, and then you get that story. And then by the end, after the 6th story, I've never read it, I don't know, they all reverse chronologically, like make sense and come up together. I'm not really sure how it works, but I just know that like one of the stories might be in the form of letters, and then another is in the form of like a thriller, and then another is like an 18th century classic. What I can only assume is a very chaotic reading experience can probably be a little bit disorienting. And I don't know about you, but that sounds like a Gemini's dream book experience for me. I'm just really, really highly anticipating this one, and I just really hope I love it. This next one could be honestly considered for both categories here, so I'm putting it last because it kind of leads into the classics as well. This one is a short story, and that is Flowers for Algernon. This one is a classic published in like the 60s, I want to say. It's very short, but people often, I've heard about this book, honestly, my entire life in various moments and settings. People say that this is just one of like the most life-changing books, specifically just kind of about empathy for others, how you kind of view the world. This is about a man with a low IQ who offers himself up to like an experimental lab treatment. Intelligence is transferred into him somehow in some way. And so the story goes through like various progress reports and then going through this experiment and having those like crazy realizations and like having all these epiphanies about what it means to be alive and humanity and empathy and all of these things. It's just apparently an incredible book, and it's a lot of times on a lot of those lists that say it's a book that you need to read before you die, or people say it's like one of the books that has changed their life and they've never stopped thinking about it. People say that they've never cried in the way that they've cried when they've read this book. So this is one that I picked up recently at the thrift store as well. Also think this is a really gorgeous edition. We are officially into the classics part of this list now. Alice in Wonderland is one of my absolute favorite movies. I still watch it a lot to this day. It's so whimsical, it's so magical. I absolutely am obsessed with the animation style of that movie as well. It's one of those like soft, embossed editions. These are actually 2 separate stories, so I just call it Alice in Wonderland, but it's technically Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. I just love every aspect of this story. This version also has illustrations in it, so I think that will make for a very fun reading experience. I actually even got a little like teacup tattoo in honor of Alice in Wonderland and the Disneyland attraction. I have very vivid, just amazing nostalgic memories of the Alice in Wonderland section in Disneyland. So it's one that I obviously need to officially read the story. This next classic is one that I actually don't own, and that is The Count of Monte Cristo. This is like a beast of a classic. I believe this is like 1,000 pages or something. So it's very intimidating because it's obviously a classic. It's very long, but it's a classic where I feel like it's more action-packed. It's an adventure story about a man who was wrongly imprisoned, and while he's in prison, he learns of an island, Monte Cristo, that has like a secret buried treasure. So it's his like life goal at that point, planning to escape, find the treasure, and then seek revenge and vengeance against the men who wrongfully convicted him. This one is another translation. I believe it was originally written in French. Very romantic. I took French in high school and I would love to actually learn to be able to speak French. It's yet again another nostalgic classic of which I had watched the movie a lot as a kid and never knew it was a book until I was older, and that is The Secret Garden. Again, really cute, pretty cover. If you're a fellow 90s baby, millennial, you might remember the iconic Secret Garden movie. This is the story of the young girl. She's an orphan and she gets sent to her like uncle's estate, and so she's lonely and she's like wandering this like magical old estate type of castle, you know, and she obviously discovers a secret garden. I actually watched the trailer for this movie again on YouTube because it had been so long since I saw it and I couldn't quite picture it in my mind, and I'm telling you, I literally cried when I watched that trailer. She has like one of those old school keys that like opens the secret garden, and it's just so magical. Everything that child me loved in like a fantasy type of movie. And so it's one that I never actually read the book. All right, this classic is another doozy. Like, this is a big piece of classic literature, and that is Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Man, this thing is heavy. Again, this one has those nice beveled, can never remember what they're called, edges on this edition. Again, this one is, especially this version, is a specific edited translation from the original Russian work of Tolstoy. But again, it's just, this is often referred to like one of the best books of all time. Tolstoy himself, when asked what his greatest work of all time, he said Anna Karenina, Anna Karenina, Anna Karenina. He himself drove himself mad. He basically drove himself insane writing this book. By the end, he hated it so much that he was like just forced to finish it because it was such like a labor of love for him. This is a very traditional like Victorian socialite type of story where Anna Karenina is this like well-off rich socialite who's married and has an affair. And so a lot of themes of war, politics, but also love, relationships, morality, social class. And again, do I really consider myself a Gemini and a reader if I haven't read Anna Karenina or read a Tolstoy in general? Of course, I'm kidding. You're a reader if you read literally anything. You could read nothing but comics and you're still a reader. Read what you want. But to me, I have this list in my mind of things that I just want to experience while I'm here on this earth. And this is one of the ones that I would like to eventually get to. And an honorable mention to War and Peace, which is an even fatter. I mean, can you even actually believe that a book exists that's this long? You know, as they say, it's never that serious, but for Tolstoy it was. And look at the size of that print too. Like, just nuts. Let's be real, who knows about this one, but this is actually one that I picked up in my very first ever thrift haul that I filmed for this channel. Actually, my first ever video. Please don't watch it. It's bad and embarrassing, but you know, do with that information what you will. But this was another thrift pickup where I was like, why not? I should have this on my shelf. It's a Tolstoy, so honorable mention to that one. I got this one kind of semi-recently, and I believe I showed it in one of my vlogs somewhere. The Odyssey, and again, honorable mention to the Iliad, which are both kind of like the Bibles of Greek mythology. This is a collection of poems or stories, the epic poems from Homer, which again, this is basically like the blueprint for a lot of Greek mythology retellings. Again, with the gorgeous deckled edges. And I just like this edition. It's very pretty. This is a story of Odysseus and his journey returning home from the Trojan War. I believe this also includes like perspective of his wife Penelope, where, as you can imagine, how her life was affected. The fact that he was returning back to Ithaca where he was the king, and it took him 10 years to return from the Trojan War. So as you can imagine, like a lot of shit went down. So this is kind of like that 10-year period. I don't know much more about it other than that, other than this is just, again, one of those like greatest pieces of all time. Again, a translation. And you guys know how much I've been loving my Greek mythology lately. To finish off this list of books I want to read before I die, we have an American classic. This is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. John Steinbeck is often considered one of the great American novelists. So I actually did read Of Mice and Men in high school. That was my high school's like John Steinbeck. It's that, and I believe Grapes of Wrath is the other one, which I do own. But this particular copy of East of Eden, I just am so drawn to it, and I feel like this is the one that sounds the most interesting as well. This is another one where I'm also very interested in this because of the setting. A lot, or if not all, of John Steinbeck's works are set in California. Central California, Northern California, basically like quite near like where I grew up. Love the traditional Western Gold Rush California type of setting. Is interesting to me, and I'm obviously attached to it in some way. This is another one where I saw it being compared to the book of Genesis, which, so you know, that's how you know that something is like, okay, this is serious now. This is not for fun. This is serious business. This copy is just absolutely gorgeous. The Salinas Valley in Northern California. It's a long, narrow swale between the two ranges of mountains, and the Salinas River winds and twists up the center until it falls into Monterey Bay. I can't tell you how many times I've actually driven through Salinas. Like, in his journal, John Steinbeck called East of Eden the first book, and indeed it has the primordial power and simplicity of myth. Set in the rich farmland of California's Salinas Valley, this sprawling and often brutal novel follows the intertwined destinies of two families whose generations helplessly reenact the fall of Adam and Eve and the poisonous rivalry of Cain and Abel. So it's basically like, again, kind of a biblical retelling of two families who are struggling in Northern California. Kind of like an epic multi-generational story. One that I just think is very pivotal to like classic American literature, and one that I would really enjoy getting to. And even if I don't, I'm still obsessed with this cover. So that is it for my bucket list of books I want to read before I die. I hope you guys enjoyed it. As per usual, please leave me a comment if you've read any of these, or if any of these you did try and read and they didn't quite work out for you. Just any thoughts. I would love to know, or just let me know what you're currently reading. I do want to make it one of my 2025 goals to knock out at least a few of these books. I don't think I've read a single classic this year. Usually I do classics in like spring or like fall, winter. Summertime, for whatever reason, I'm not really feeling classics. I'm usually reading spicy dark romance, YA fantasies, things like that. I anticipate that I might be getting to one of these in the next few months. I find I enjoy reading kind of depressing classical works in the winter, you know, just really like lean into that. I really enjoy leaning into the theme and the energy of the times. So I think that's probably when I'll hopefully get to some of these. Thank you guys so much for listening to me ramble. Please subscribe if you like book, Kindle, iPad, cozy vlog type of content, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.